lot, and I'd like to welcome Caroline Sinders now on stage. Caroline is machine learning design researcher and artist, and for the past few years she has been focusing on the intersections of natural language processing, artificial intelligence, abuse, online harassment, and politics in digital conversational spaces, many things connected together. And she's also a founder of Convocation Design Plus Research, which is a design and research agency. And they focus in on these intersections. They are designing for public good and how to solve communication difficult problems. And actually her talk right now will be about how to design experiences for safety, intimacy, and delight. So I'm really curious about this topic, how we can approach to it. And yeah, I'll leave the stage to you. Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you. Hello. All right, let me share screen. Thank you so much for having me. So hi, I'm Caroline Sinders. I am a design researcher and artist, and I look a lot at things like community health and experiential design, as well as machine learning and complex technology. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I was funded by Omidyar Network and Mozilla Foundation to look at how different communities were sort of transitioning to being online and what problems they were facing and how they were actually sort of generating or creating online experiences. So hi, I'm Caroline, and I study people online. I've, for example, worked with places like Bandcamp, Facebook, the Wikimedia Foundations, and others. And I've been looking primarily at things like online harassment, social networks, and how communities exist within technology and digital spaces. As an artist, my work has been shown at the Tate Modern State Exchange, the Victoria and Albert Museum, Museum of Modern Art, Bologna, as well as others. Sorry, give me 1 second. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I, much like a lot of you most likely, had to transition my work to quickly going online. Workshops I would hold for an art project, for example, what you see here is feminist data set, had to just transition as quickly as possible online. Sorry, my slide notes are not loading. Give me 1 second. I like both of them popping up. All right, anyway, when the pandemic happened, and this was sort of the point of this one slide, is I had to transition my entire practice, like all of you, we had to transition our entire lives into being inside of these digital interfaces and spaces. And even as someone who is a millennial, if you will, I was still sort of hesitant and sort of facing a lot of trepidation about what this transition would look like, even though for me, it was probably easier than others. I've been working remotely since 2018. I had already like a very digital practice. I do a lot of work about digital art, and even my research work, I had already figured out how to do remotely. But the rest of my community had not figured that out, right? And there was problems within what that transition would look like for the rest of the world. But even still, I wonder, when I deal a lot with community, what does it feel like to have everything completely shift to something else, right? When we can't necessarily bring in aspects of the physical because we're all in our own sort of rooms together, but we're experiencing these different spaces actually really quite differently. And so funded by Omidyar Network and Mozilla Foundation, I wanted to look at how creative spaces like schools and activists and mutual aid groups were creating online communities, how some of them were transitioning pre-existing communities into digital spaces, and how others were creating brand new communities inside of these digital spaces. And really everything is changing in this moment. We're for some of us almost hitting a year anniversary into being in the pandemic. And for others, it's been more than a year that we've been experiencing the pandemic. This is bringing all different kinds of problems. In another research report that I'm working on online harassment and the pandemic, we found that pretty much everyone is experiencing mental health problems and anxiety. A researcher in that report pointed out that regardless of background or location or even social or economic status, that we're all in the pandemic. No one can really opt out of experiencing this global phenomenon. So within that, we're all somewhat in the same space, even if we have perhaps a better handle than others on experiencing it. But right now we're in a serious point of fatigue and exhaustion of balancing everything from work to caretaking, and in some cases, for some people having to be their children's school teacher, as well as still having to show up to work every day. One thing I've been wondering though is even within the pandemic, how do we find enjoyment and leisure? How can we move, when we move from the same screen to work to the personal, how do we still have leisure within that? For me, that's been joining communities and trying to figure out new ways to stay in contact. Life still moves on. We adapt and our social lives adapt. And our social lives have to be in existence because they feed our emotional lives. So it kind of brings me to this question I've been thinking about. How are we creating beauty and avoiding harm online, and what does it look like? So I think of digital interfaces as bridges to our communities. Technology can't fix the systemic inequality revealed by COVID-19, but it can help make connections to our communities better. And right now, a lot of these tools are failing. Zoom, for example, wasn't designed to be used in a way like a social network. A lot of the video conferencing tools we have are so narrowly constrained and were created for what are called enterprise uses, so just for business. So as designers and engineers and community members, we need to create better and more responsible tools so that communities can have safety, intimacy, and even delight. So it brings me back to this question of what does a community need? And then how do we define community? So a community needs safety, intimacy, and support with tools that can be customized or allow for more agency to create differing spaces and differing needs. So the next few slides are going to show examples of some art shows and lectures and dance parties that are all happening online that I attended throughout this research. And to get to this where we are right now, for example, in this meeting, it took a lot of planning, care, and consideration. And to get to where we are right now, we had to be really mindful to avoid even problems like this. Zoom bombing, which is a phenomenon that popped up in the beginning of the pandemic, is a brand new kind of harassment. It's when people take control of a Zoom meeting by turning the audio on and saying harassing things like racial slurs, misogynistic threats, etc. People can also take control of the video and expose themselves or expose harmful content. So a way to combat this is by having the moderator only be in control and remove the ability for any of us to sort of speak or show our videos, which is how this was set up. For example, we were sort of in a webinar setup where there is a moderator sort of helping facilitate who is a co-host or a co-panelist and when. And this kind of choice helps create areas of safety, but it does at times cut down on interaction for the audience members and participants. But I like to point out that like our tools have always been imperfect. We are always using imperfect tools that at times are having to balance safety and intimacy with one another. Sometimes we have less intimate spaces to have more safety. And our tools have always been imperfect, but we're seeing the cracks now more than ever because of things like Zoom bombing or people of color being disproportionately affected by things like facial recognition, surveillance technology, and COVID-19. For example, in the middle of the pandemic, around April or May 2020, Zoom announced it wouldn't use end-to-end encryption on free accounts to help better partner with police departments. And then a few weeks after that, due to public outrage, they decided to give everyone free end-to-end encryption. So technology has always been unequal. We're just seeing it more clearly now because we're all online more and we're all having to use more of the same and similar tools. With Zoom bombing, some of the solutions to mitigate it cut down on intimacy building. For example, I can only see a portion of you and I'm only able to interact with a portion of you. Being able to perhaps interact with all of you could make for a more engaging conversation, but it would make it perhaps also a more unsafe conversation for me as the moderator, for example. But right now I'm lecturing to all of you in an apartment and I can't see a lot of your faces. And even if I could, I would probably just see these really small screens that are stacked at the top of my screen. So I can't really interact with you the way that I used to do. And so this kind of brings me back to my original question, what does a community need? And we're gonna look at some examples. Mutual aid groups are volunteer groups that provide supplies, groceries, and support during a time of crisis. This community building effort is able to grow quickly and successfully because the participants are already community builders in their community. So with Bed-Stuy Strong, the creators of it were already engaging in a practice of mutual aid. Bed-Stuy Strong, for example, has a focus just on those that live in the neighborhood of Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. So it's the specific focus on the community and not the individual that has allowed for groups like NYC PPE, which was named Last Mile. They were delivering PPP masks to nurses and doctors, and Bed-Stuy Strong to come online. So what's key here is that the community ties already existed, albeit in less official forms, before COVID-19. NYC PPE was a group of people that already knew each other and were doing different kinds of volunteer work. Bed-Stuy Strong was also different kinds of community organizers that existed prior to COVID-19. So what's important here is that the technology sprung up around these communities as people went into action to help each other. So they didn't have to form the community ties, those already existed. Instead, they could use the technology around them to help transition the community to being online. And these groups are using multiple tools in a way that I call digitally duct taping together to have those tool functions. What that means is that they're working with thousands of data points and many volunteers, and they're moving from tools like Airtable to Slack to WhatsApp to be able to help their community function. But their workflow, which is digitally duct taped together, does need to use all these different tools. So it kind of raises the question of if all these tools could be brought under one umbrella tool, would it work faster? They have to use Airtable because that's how they organize. Slack is a great way to then inform community members who are not involved directly in volunteering. And WhatsApp is the way that the core community volunteers speak to each other. And using all of these different tools serves as a very integral function. So one can't be dropped to try to consolidate for the other two. And this is a Bed-Stuy Strong volunteer buying groceries for over 21 neighbors. So Bed-Stuy Strong is a digital group that sprung up to help the neighborhood of Bed-Stuy support their neighbors during COVID-19. And they have all different kinds of support, including grocery delivery. The group pasted flyers all over the neighborhood with instructions on how to join the Bed-Stuy Strong Slack channel to coordinate delivery, to create spaces of communication during COVID-19 and organize volunteers. So they took the physical aspect of placing up a piece of paper in the neighborhood to then bring people online. They use Slack, Google Voice, and Airtable to help organize deliveries. Samantha Garfield, a volunteer with Bed-Stuy Strong, gave examples of how the group tries to meet and organize their nearly 3,000 members. She said, "The other day we posted an all-hands meeting where we were looking at how to get broad-based buy-in on a set of guiding principles for our mutual aid group. And we were really struggling with how we can do that effectively because there might be hundreds of people on the call. And the goal was not just to ask for a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but to genuinely invite hand raisers, so people that have comments, and create all different levels of possible engagement. So we had a conversation going where we asked people to stack in the Zoom, it's where you say stack so you can speak, in the Zoom chat, and then B, asking them to weigh in on a poll on Slido, and then C, concurrently posting the Q&A on Slido, and people could upvote or downvote questions. So there are all these levels of how people could voice their dissent based on how extreme the dissent was. So within this, groups need to think through when and taking information of what they're going to do with it and why. What is the point of the group and what is their solutions? Bed-Stuy Strong exists just for Bed-Stuy, not for all of Brooklyn, and they have this very defined mission. What they accomplish is monumental, and they accomplish that with dedication, organization, and a focus of fulfilling the mission of their groups. In March 2020, I spoke to graphic designer, educator, and lecturer Prem Krishnamurthy about his performance lecture series called Present, which started just by happenstance. Prem had planned an exhibition called Polymorph with the University of Connecticut at the end of March. This was supposed to be a physical art show before COVID had happened. And it was supposed to be accompanied by a performance lecture and essay that he had written, and that would then be distributed online. In mid-March, the show was postponed, and Prem quickly shifted gears because he still wanted to do the event. And what he decided to do was create this Zoom performance lecture series, and he invited all of the artists, curators, and lecturers from the University of Connecticut show to do cameos. So what had meant to just be a solo performance lecture became more of an inclusive format, where different artists could be given different spaces to show their work. While it was originally meant to be a one-time thing, so many people had said to Prem that they had enjoyed it, and he decided to continue this with about almost 7 lectures. You have to rethink how you do things and how you present ideas to give them shape. Prem learned to work with Zoom in a particular way and edit film and Premiere in a certain way. And he has a documentation of the show in Google Slides, and he's trying to activate different parts of the brain and learning from every week of the show. On another level of it, Prem was starting to understand questions around community and scale in a different way. The cap isn't who fits in a room, it's a different kind of cap. He hasn't limited the number of participants yet, but there's this kind of natural scale to how things shape out, and the number of people might change based on the scale of the room. What's interesting is Prem really focused on a variety of different tempos and rhythm. So he's switching from there being group meditation for a few minutes in the beginning to a video, to then a lecture, to a music break, to then a Q&A, and then lastly ending on group karaoke. One of the things that's interesting about Zoom is the way it highlights this impossibility of a singular viewpoint. So when Prem records on Zoom, he receives a particular version and he doesn't know what anyone else sees at the top of their screen. So, we're all sort of sitting next to different people on Zoom. What he enjoys is that there isn't really like a true experience to this. Another event I attended was the Data Feminism Lectures, which was a multi-100-person lecture series where participants could engage in the comments with the moderators who were the authors, Lauren Klein and Catherine D'Ignacio. And each week they would read and discuss a different chapter in their book, Data Feminism. In this context, the moderators and authors have complete control. It's much more of a structured lecture. But the content was like so good. And what I enjoyed about this being in Berlin is that this was a kind of open lecture series I never could have attended prior to COVID-19, because this lecture series would be in a physical room in Boston where the writers are located. But instead, this transition actually allowed for a much more diverse audience with participants from across the EU, India, Malaysia, the US, and the UK. So sometimes the shift online actually does create more equity and creates a much more diverse audience. I hope post-COVID-19, we can still have some of these digital spaces and opportunities, for example, this lecture series. One other group I looked at was Now Play This, an interactive arts and games festival that's held in London's Somerset House. Right before COVID-19, it was canceled and then reinstated to be digital. Mary Folston, the curator of the festival and the former curator of games at the Victoria and Albert Museum, has been thinking a lot about curation and exhibition design and what that means inside of a digital space. She built what you see above, which is Chris Durden's Urban Lights in Animal Crossing, and pushed for Now Play This to have some events inside of Animal Crossing. Marie is assessing as a curator who traditionally worked with the digital, but by bringing stuff into a physical space, now knows that that is impossible during COVID. If we can't be in the same space touching the same things, how do we translate the physical into the virtual, especially within a festival? This isn't about making an exhibition physical because the digital already manifests physically. So she started thinking about rituals, resonance, and constraints. For example, going to a festival or exhibition, you have to get into a car. You have to go to a physical space where only so many bodies can fit in a room. It's a form of intimacy but you can change perhaps how you act in the space versus how you act in your own living room or backyard. So how can those rituals or changes be brought into the digital space, which brings us to Animal Crossing. Historically, virtual exhibitions have existed online and in virtual life, like Second Life, and those things have come before. So what Marie's proposing isn't really new, but what we see here are the creators of Untitled Goose Game presenting on a panel inside of Animal Crossing. Within Animal Crossing, you have to travel to these digital spaces to actually visit them. You have to go visit an island inside of the game. Lots of things online feel almost like a broadcast version. It's a one-to-many, so one person lecturing to many. But Marie wanted intimacy. Animal Crossing can't be a broadcast channel. It allows users to engage in specific ritualized ways. They have to visit specific Animal Crossing islands. They have to go first to another island where the plane is and then travel to another island. It's an embodiment of a space that is different for users than doing something in Zoom. And the juxtaposition of what this space looks like looks a certain way, which is twee, cute, and personalized. It touched on intimacy. Everyone who's in Animal Crossing has made their characters a certain way. The rituals don't translate 100%, but that is okay. Now Play This also created virtual field trips with Robert Yang, a games professor and creator, who took people into Half-Life 1. The idea was to go just beyond a talk. There's multiplayer games where many people can go into the game themselves and then have a guided experience by an artist. And they're viewing it as a field trip. For the field trips, participants have to book a ticket prior to the field trip online and show up at a certain time. You have to go get in the game and you have to really focus and follow. These field trips are capped at a certain size so the artist can engage with participants and the participants can really follow along. This is another example of a curated field trip. This is still Half-Life 1, but there's another field trip called No Man's Sky where an artist took people on a planet in No Man's Sky and then explained landscape photography. So the 10 participants in this field trip were actually given assignments to sort of do this digital landscape photography in a video game and then come back and show what they had photographed. Both of these events had different levels of engagement. Both of these field trips were also live streamed on Twitch so other people could watch in a more broadcast style. However, the point of the field trips was to create more intimate experiences. And I love this example because it's showing a morphing or reconfiguring of video games, of some of us using something that is not intended, or using something in a way that's not intended to yield delightful results. Here are some takeaways. This is a checklist I created out of the research, which any of you can visit. It's on responsibledesign.tech. People need consistent ways to share media across video platforms. We can look to Slack, which has the ability to drag and drop across any tool interface. On Zoom, you can only drag and share content in this really small window at the very bottom. You can't even share media on Google Hangouts. People need more intimate ways to have conversations. So on Zoom, we see this in breakout rooms. So the ability to pair off and create smaller spaces of engagement is important. And people also need customizations. Many creators, school educators, and event planners have mentioned wanting a dashboard to better import audio, line up speakers, etc. What they need is a form of a broadcasting tool. And just to follow up here, this is just a sample of what people have said. People needed this customization before COVID-19, but we especially need it now, and we'll need it after this moment too, since most likely we aren't going back to the way things were. A conferencing tool is just like a social network, a TV station, and the most intimate conversational space someone can be in, and the tool needs to reflect that, and currently it does not. And here's what people are doing even when the best tools fail. They are creating workarounds like engaging in digital duct tape, which is using a lot of tools like Slack, Google Docs, and Zoom to create a workflow for their communities. Some schools, for example, are using Zoom, email, Google Docs, Slack, GitHub, and Arena for assignments, knowledge sharing, and tasks. One tool isn't sufficient enough, but integration across all of them could be helpful. Another sort of workflow people are engaging in is a run of show. So time in Zoom feels much longer than it does if we were engaging face-to-face. But even with the best tools, a host still needs a plan, knowing who is speaking and when with prepared questions. And from this run of show, attendees need guidance. So many users had mentioned in this research of being thrown into breakout rooms, but given no clarity or warning as to what was expected of them in those spaces. So you need to tell your attendees what they're doing in the very beginning, what is going on, what the plan is, and what's happening at what time. A side note, a tool or interface can help with that, such as showing breakout groups or times, but hosts still need to outline what is expected of people in those breakout rooms. And lastly, we should think of tangible rituals, things that we can ask attendees to hold up, like a paper or a sign, or engaging in a breathing exercise. Sometimes the most intimate acts online aren't the UI we put into tools, but the exercises we can do apart but together. Even best tools still require human planning and insight. We can't entirely tech our way out of this, and we shouldn't think that we can. But design and technology can exist to help support communities without adding more friction to their lives. And this leads me to some things we can realize. This is never going to be a one-to-one to the offline, and no tool can ever reflect that. But what we can make is different, and it has to be that way. Marie and Prim both brought up reconfiguring expectations, and I think that's true here, especially for design. It's a different kind of medium. We interact with the screen differently than we do if we were in a room together. There may be some similarities. For example, I'm lecturing to you in a presentation that I would maybe give on stage. But we have to yield to the limitations of the medium, or at least incorporate them. Prim mentioned an hour in Zoom feeling like a 3-hour meeting, so time matters here. And on the speaker side of things, you interact with your audience differently. I can't hear any of you laugh or sigh or react to anything that I'm saying, so I have to perform more. And I have to be confident that this talk is resonating with you in a way that I design. And we are lacking specific social cues that physical closeness provides, and there's no real way around that. The tools we have may not allow for harassment moderation, and I'm saying this directly to something like Google Hangouts, which has no moderation. So until tools have harassment UI, like the ability to mute and block someone, or hide from someone in the chat, or hide them from seeing you, we won't actually be that safe in these digital spaces. Even with this, events still need things like a code of conduct and a plan for how they're going to deal with harassment. Much like having a physical space where you could ask these questions of, what are you going to do when harassment happens? Or here's our code of conduct. We especially need to ask these questions for online gatherings. And designers need to realize harassment happens everywhere on every platform, and in any instance where a person can talk to one person, 5 people, or 1,000. What are the power dynamics of communication? Prim mentioned, for example, a professor starting a Telegram group with his students. What are the controls in that group, which actually are the social dynamics? Students can do whatever they want technically inside of Telegram. They can post videos, GIFs, reactions. They can really write whatever they want. There isn't keyword blocking. And there are a few moderation controls. But the biggest moderation control in that group is that the students know that their professor is in the Telegram channel, and that there's a social and power weight to the professor and what the professor means inside of that channel. The professor controls their grade. So the control that exists in society is when we imprint onto social networks in the digital, and that's also something we can't remove. How can we yield to intimacy? For example, unstructured chaos may not work on Zoom. Zoom is already extremely structured. But what feels enjoyable to me as a user is the curatorial weight of seeing a choice that a curator made, of seeing that there is a plan, that there is preparation. It's important to point out here that even things that feel structureless or formless, like anarchist meetings or non-hierarchical communities, that there's still actually a structure in how they hold meetings and how they hold talks and how they speak to each other. And this is still a form of intimacy. Often I think we assume that a lack of structure creates intimacy or spontaneity. That doesn't translate into a digital space, though, very well at all. What does create intimacy, though, is a plan, and a plan for how people can speak to each other. And lastly, we should reset our expectations. Both Marie and Prim emphasize this. We have to rethink scale at this level. Another conference I'm attending wrote to participants and mentioned moving at the speed of trauma-informed trust. In other words, slow. Scale, slowness, size, and expectations are all related. Marie has been letting go of the concept of the audience number with expectations when designing intimacy online. What does success mean for Now Play This? Perhaps it's not thousands of page views. Perhaps it's the kind of intimacy that they can create. For example, if Now Play This had a physical talk and 30 people came and filled the room, that would be a success because the room is filled. So with this shift online, Marie is letting go of the need that there needs to be hundreds of points of engagement. She says, is it that we don't need more content, but that our ask of the content needs to shift? Instead of one to many, we could be shifting to intimacy of one to a few or one to one. For example, just having Robert Yang walk around and Twitch screen with thousands of viewers could be successful, but a less rich experience than the field trip. Pram echoes this as well. Why do groups of 5 to 6 people versus 8 to 20 feel so different? When we move slowly, what can we make design do? I like to instead of making encyclopedias, how can we make zines instead? Instead of thinking of everyone as a social network, what are things we can create that are smaller and more sustainable for communities? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Caroline. There were many thoughts, and I already have like loads of questions that we don't have time for. But let me ask you at least one question, because you showed several examples of gamification, how to bring content to online, with the gamification elements. And I'm seeing this tendency or trend much more. And I'm thinking, what is the downside of gamificating the content too much? And how to find the balance, not to lose the content and the main messages over the format.
That is such a good question. Thank you for asking. I mean, I think a lot of it is making sure you don't over plan or over facilitate activities. So like, for example, I had a friend who gave a presentation in Mozilla Hubs, and she was saying just actually how difficult it was to do that in Mozilla Hubs because it's a social VR space. And so it's a great place to show VR art or 3D digital art. It is not a great place to do a Zoom like style presentation, right? Because the software doesn't work very well. So I think a lot of it is like recognizing what is the actual event you want to have. So for example, we could probably have a Q&A between you and myself in Mozilla Hubs, but me having done my presentation would have been just really difficult, right? That would have been like hard. Another event I went to had almost every minute of the event planned out, where like it was like a 4-hour event. So it was across Discord. Then there was like 4 talks that were happening throughout the day, except within those talks, we actually had 45 minutes of breakout rooms and like facilitated questions. So that was actually much more of a conference, but that hadn't really been articulated to people. And then on Discord, we were then grouped into separate groups spontaneously and then we're then given prompts to engage. So they were trying to sort of do a thing where they were trying to put together strangers to have them meet each other and then also make the talks more engaging by having a very seasoned facilitator there and then have exercises in those talks. But it was just too many points of interaction. So there was no way to like really meaningfully engage because you can't be engaging on Discord while you're grouped into a Zoom meeting to engage, right? And then you're also sort of grouped into a workshop setting without realizing that you were attending a workshop, for example. So I think a lot of it is just recognizing of like, what are you hoping to achieve? And how can you strike a balance between it being like not enough and too much? So I think it just all really kind of depends on the content you're asking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's tough for everyone who's trying to organize whatever online, yeah. Because there are no like specific guidance how to create really good experience. Because it really depends on the content, what you want to achieve, and the context of the whole setup. So Thanks a lot, Caroline. We'll be sharing your links and interesting sources you mentioned with the audience later for sure, so we can check, for example, your checklist further. And now we're about to start a break. So let me